Hi, Jeff. Thanks for taking a few minutes to talk on Zoom. Talk to Sweden from Florida.
Yeah.
You hear me okay?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes.
So originally, I was thinking I was researching about early Urantia Book history.
Volume up a little bit. Oh, thank you. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was researching about early Urantia history, and noticed that your father was quite one of the most involved people, wasn't he? Kind of a leader in the forum. And I've also been researching people who were influential or famous in some way, who read the Urantia.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and
You
it seems like
mentioned
your
all
father
those
was quite
musicians.
successful. Go ahead.
You mentioned quite a few musicians you know about.
Yeah. And even in the forum, there were quite a few writers, like the Sadlers and your father, and there was Sir Hubert Wilkins.
Didn't the forum start out as a sort of a philosophical get-together, talking about interesting things and people?
Yeah.
And then the papers came later.
Yeah.
And I remember my father telling me that one of his friends, a man named Lister Allwood, had been a friend of Sadler's and learned about the beginning of the study group and told my father about it. And Dad went and liked it so much, thought it was going to be a very good thing and enjoyable. And after he had been to one session, he asked Dr. Sadler, could I bring my fiancée? And so the two of them began attending that study group or social group with interest in people and books and things like that. At the beginning, I think it was 1923 or so.
Yeah, that's really a long time ago. And a long time before the book was even published, or right? It was even before the
they had to wait
about.
so many years. Yeah, and publication was delayed, and I only had to wait 5 years, and then the book was here. It was wonderful.
And how old were you when you first found out about the book and started reading?
I brought a picture here to show how old I was.
Great. You're the youngest one there.
Is that? I don't know. Anyway, this is at the airport in Sydney. And my father had been called down there to do seminars and advertising, copywriting, education for department store staffs and newspapers. And we actually got on a trip all the way around the world that summer. I was 13. That was a wonderful thing. And Barry was about 5.5, my brother, 4.5 or 5 years older. Boy, what an experience that was. And that was the year I began reading the papers in a back room at 533 Diversity Parkway. And Marion Rowley, once I was okayed by Bill Sadler Jr., who interviewed me at 13, she would come take me to a back room on the ground floor when my folks went upstairs to this, and Barry at times when he was in town. And she brought 8x10 envelope with Jesus papers, and I'm always grateful for that she started me with the Jesus papers. Wonderful. And I'd read the papers while they were having a forum meeting upstairs, 1950, I believe.
Yeah, it seems like it's not very common that a young teenager that age would have the desire and the energy to read the Urantia book. Was there something special, do you think, that caught your attention?
Yeah,
Or
I've seen the interviews, with Larry Bowman and wondered why we never met. And I figured it was that he came in just after my folks and family had moved out to California. So I don't think we've met yet.
okay, so you spent some years in Chicago, and then you were away in California after that.
Yeah, the folks moved to Los Altos Hills, California, not far from Palo Alto.
Hmm.
And I went down to San Jose State
Hmm.
to complete my second years and third year and fourth year of college,
Uh-huh.
which had been interrupted wisely by my father suggesting uh, that I go into the military for a couple of years to ripen because I had received permission to continue after my sophomore year at Grinnell College. But my grade average was C minus, and apparently he thought I didn't have a C minus mind, and he wanted me to grow up a little bit, and it worked out perfectly. There was Eisenhower was president. There was no war at the time, and I had a wonderful 3-year enlistment in the ASA. It was a great, great experience.
What's the ASA?
Army Security Agency, and they had told my father, who talked to them first uh, on the phone, if Jeffrey finishes, how did they put that? As we will give him a language aptitude test. Oh, after he finishes basic training, that's it. And if he passes the language test, we'll send him to the language school in Monterey, California. And oh boy, what an assignment that would be. So I figured I liked languages and said, sure. That's why I enlisted in that agency.
So did you get
And it
a
worked out.
and did you get a what kind of a degree did you get?
They don't give degrees after you complete your course. And I had 4 choices after going to Fort Devens and taking the aptitude test. Um, I think they offered Turkish, French, and Russian, and maybe one more. And I chose the Russian because it sounded exciting, and Russia was in the news. And while I was at the language school, Sputnik went overhead. That was something.
And, and then when you completed when you went back to college, what kind of education did you pursue there?
Well, I was uncertain about careers, but I wanted to do something. I thought I was going to be maybe a radio announcer or television announcer, something like that. And so I took radio and television performance major and took courses related to that and enjoyed that and did okay at my last 2 years of college.
Wow. And then what did you end up working with after college?
My wife, I met her at San Jose State at that time, and she was the perfect answer to my praying sincerely while I was in the Army to be a family man and to find the right one. And this is the first mention of what I call nudges. I never, in all my life, I've never heard a voice speak to me from beyond, but nudges happened frequently that I think were divinely inspired.
And
And she was a big nudge, and I made a good choice. And she did too, except for one fault of mine, which I still have, and eventually led, after 24 years together, raising a family and all that, eventually led to a divorce, and I've been single ever since. But she was a perfect choice, and I think we were circumstanced to meet.
Mhm. And where did you guys live?
We started out in San Jose in an apartment, and gradually I found work in advertising instead of radio and TV because my father's experience and I had studied his methods of copywriting and so forth, and I worked for retail furniture stores uh, in California, and we had several locations. In fact, that was one of Patricia's disappointments, is that we went to so many different locations, and she was left packing the boxes while I went down to locate the new house and or apartment and get settled. She
So
had
yeah, so
the
you come from quite a advertising family, right? Because your brother also worked in advertising, and your father was kind of a leader in teaching advertising, right?
That's right, Michael. Would you rather be called Michael or Mike?
I don't really have a preference. I like both.
Good.
Um, yeah, could you tell a bit more? I guess you were pretty young when your father became a successful author and sort of advertising leader. But do you know
He
much about
was,
his life as a sort of a public figure?
yeah, well, he was not so public outside of the realm of advertising, but in that field, he was recognized as a knowledgeable and experienced specialist, I would say an expert. And that's why he was called down to Australia in 1950. And they gave our whole family a ticket to go around the world that summer. Boy, what an education that was. It was because of his expertise. And then later he returned to Australia for another session without the family, and he's been to Japan for the same thing and other places. Yeah, he's
What
really,
I've heard is that his one he had one particular book that was a real bestseller. And
yes, How to Write Advertising That Sells. And boy, that book got around. I might just add that I had a friend who was from the Philippines when I was in Saudi Arabia teaching English for several programs. And we went to meet a man named Rudy Torres in Manila who was considering offering for sale in the Philippines the course that I had put together on audio cassette tapes at that time. Uh, I was 50 years old at the time and had taken a flyer or two in retail sales of this and that in creating educational things on a small scale. And in his office, uh, I looked up at the bookcase, which was filled with lots and lots of books, and I saw my father's book, How to Write Advertising That Sells, here in this entrepreneurial office in Manila. That kind of thing, his knowledge was so much respected and brought sales simply by his slogan, all good selling is serving. He really believed that, he taught it, and he practiced it, and people responded in the business to him favorably, wonderfully favorably.
I think I also heard that there was a quote from him that got popular about something like the best word in advertising is free or something like that.
Say it again.
It was something along the lines of the best word in advertising is free.
I don't recall that at all.
I've been in contact with a Urantia Book reader who spent time with your father. I
Larry
guess
Mullins?
no, Lee Rector.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I met him only once. And go on, please.
Yeah, well, he just told me that story, and you know, and he showed me a picture of I think the one of the first pages of How to Write Advertising That Sells, that talks about different companies your father had been like an advertising leader in, or head of advertising and things like that, and said that he was very very influential and successful in that field. And so here he was, one of the people in the forum who, maybe because of his success in advertising, was, or maybe just had good leadership qualities, right? But he sort of had a leadership, from what, you know, when I read histories about the forum, his name is one of the few ones that often will come up beyond,
I'm glad to
you
hear
know, the
that.
Sadlers, you know, beyond the Sadlers and Christie, and also there was in the Sherman diaries. Are you familiar with those?
What days?
There was a guy named Harold Sherman. Him and his
My
wife.
hearing, I'm sorry, my hearing isn't. Oh,
Okay.
oh, Sherman, yeah,
Yeah,
Harold
and then
Sherman.
I think your father was kind of involved in being.
Yeah, he didn't regard Sherman that highly.
He was quite loyal
Well,
to the Sadlers.
there was some dispute, and I've been reading Saskia Pramsma's books about the Shermans, and it is an interesting story how much Sherman accomplished, by the way, while he was a member of the Forum and had an apartment, I believe, right across the street from 533.
Yeah, and was your father quite close with the Sadlers and other like
Oh, yes.
Christie and so
Yeah,
forth?
he respected Dr. Sadler so much. And I was lucky enough to not get to know these people, but to meet, in addition to Marion Rowley, who brought the papers for me to read downstairs when my folks were upstairs in the forum. I got acquainted with Emma Christie, and I never met Sadler's wife, Lena, but she had passed on, I believe, by that time. But the place was surprisingly staffed. Many people were surprised by old ladies, you know, Edith Cook and others, and they all had their roles to play and enjoyed conversations on the phone with people from everywhere and so on. It was a nice atmosphere all the time that I was acquainted with those people.
Yeah, and how would you respond to the hypothesis that Dr. Sadler wrote the Urantia book, since it's something that is, you know, a few people are kind of promoting that theory.
I'm with those people who say that's nonsense, although I understand how they see similarities in his writing style and so on. But the Urantia book is truly a revelation, and whatever, I don't think things were involved except the table of contents. That's my belief.
Um, yeah, and one gets the impression that the people, them and most of the people like your parents, were very strong believers themselves, you know, but the Sadlers and so forth.
Say a little more about
Well,
that.
that I get the impression that, well, if they had if they were somehow dishonest about its origin, then maybe they wouldn't have been strong believers themselves, or why would they believe in something if it was somehow of a corrupt origin? But it seems like the forum members, and especially the Sadlers, were very devoted and very strong believers.
It took him quite a while, Dr. Sadler, didn't it? Until he got into the papers about the apostles. That's the story I heard.
Yeah, they say that he kind of teared up when he was reading it, and said that it struck of authenticity or something like that. But
Yeah,
that
well, I suppose
the others in the inner circle had been believing it for a much longer time.
that would be impressive to a psychiatrist, as Sadler was, who knew a lot about people.
Yeah. And so you've been reading the Urantia book for how many years now? Quite a few decades.
I'd say 5 years before it was published. 1950, late that year, I think I got into it. Thanks to Marion Rowley bringing me these papers downstairs at that old dark desk. And I have wonderful memories of those years. Just sort of floating around and being available and Saskia Pransma also has done How I Found the Urantia book and how it changed my life. More than 300, or I don't know how many. Do you know? Tales of
It's a lot, but
individual.
I think maybe it was 280, or yeah, it's a pretty impressive number.
It's very impressive, and they all were fortunate enough to have the Urantia book fall into their hands, uh, and it turned out that uh, I forgot where I was going with this. I'll come back to it in a minute if
Something
it comes
about
back.
maybe how people feel about having found the Urantia book. Something that I came to my mind recently is that we're kind of where more and more younger generations are, YouTube is a bigger source of information, or when they want to learn about something, they're more likely to go to YouTube than they are to go to Wikipedia and so forth, because video can be quite useful in having, maybe you could be for various reasons. It's a growing part of the internet, and way for people to get information. And I think it would be great to do something similar to that book, but have it be in the form of people actually telling their stories, like in video. But of course, that would be an immense project.
I find YouTube a wonderful thing. It's probably the best thing, uh, along with email on the computer that I have experience with. And I watch all kinds of things, documentaries, and I use YouTube to watch Derek. His last name is Sumras. His interviews with individuals related to the Urantia revelation. YouTube is to me a wonderful way of looking at things that interest me, and some things I go back to again and again. But I have not really learned to be comfortable with computers. For some reason, I admit I don't feel old in any way, except for my lack of interest and apparent stupidities related to electronic stuff. I don't use a cell phone, for example. So I miss out on all the good stuff people are getting off their telephones, and a lot of bad stuff too, I think.
Yeah.
What are you, Let's talk about you just for a minute. What are you engaged in writing?
Well, it began that I was doing a bachelor's thesis, and then it ended up also doing a master's thesis where my supervisor at Stockholm University at the comparative religions department said, well, he knew I knew a lot about the Urantia book. And so he said he insisted that I write about it. And I said, well, it's going to take forever. But he insisted. So then when I was working on it, he kept telling me, well, I told him, well, this is too much. You know, I ended up writing over 200 pages and or that I was like, it's really hard not to go into depth in these things. And he said, well, don't worry about it because you need to have this as a manuscript to publish as a book later. So he kind of kept planting the seed that, okay, this is meant to be a book. And the whole thing about getting credit as a thesis is less important than the larger project of having it be published as a book. And then when I finally did get credit for it, that's what the other professors said too, that, well, you need to publish this. And I was, that's just for the academic world. Like he said, well, if I have a student who asks, I want to do some research on Urantia, he wants to be able to give them my book, give them the thesis that I wrote, because it kind of gave an overview of many different topics.
What would you call it when it came out as a book, when it would come out as a book?
I haven't decided on a title.
A couple of potential titles?
No, not really. I'm reluctant to say any of them because I haven't really settled on one that feels right. But my thesis was something like the origin, teachings, movement, and broader influence of the Urantia book. So it was like a sweep, as he called it, of very many things related, and then kind of this focus on the broader influence of the Urantia book. Thought it's quite interesting, partly because like the world has a really easy time ignoring the Urantia book, right? I mean, the world's been maybe in quiet. Some people are obviously reading it, but in general, there's not a lot of interest in it. But so I was quite surprised. I've known about the book all my life, and I would have never imagined that Jimi Hendrix and Elvis Presley and all these people who were like some of the most renowned people in the world actually were seriously reading it. And so that kind of became my focus for about the past 10 years. Ever since I finished the original thesis, I've been writing hundreds and hundreds of pages about these people, their lives, and how the Urantia book, basically everything I can find. A lot of times, it varies to what extent it might have played a role in their work and in their lives, or how much evidence you can find. But it's fascinating, but it's also this interesting thing where you just keep finding more as you research. So you keep thinking, well, I'm almost done, but then rather than, like the finish line keeps moving ahead of you but it's at the same time, it's a great adventure.
Grows to more seeds, doesn't it?
Yeah,
a lot of seeds.
Yeah,
all at once.
So it's it's a great adventure, but now I'm getting more focused on that. It needs to get completed in in my parents' lifetime, if possible. You know what I mean?
But you're not cursed with the habit of ease seeking and procrastination.
Well, I think everyone has
would destroy.
Yeah, but I also have a baby and two other, 3 daughters. So things are pretty life is quite full in a very wonderful way, very
that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, and if you look at the forum days, I mean, just a lot of these people, and they didn't really mix their public lives very much with the Urantia book, right? I mean, Sadler was an example of that he was quite famous as a speaker and an author, sort of popular psychology, one of the biggest successes in that avenue. In a way, you could say it like self-help was a lot of his work, right? And but he didn't really. He kind of kept that separate from his more private Urantia activities. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. And then maybe it was similar with your father. Would you say? I mean, he created the Concordex, right? Which was must have been a enormous project.
Yeah, he was annoyed that by the fact that there was no real index, even though the first printings, several of them, said an index is soon to follow. It just didn't happen. And he had so many friends that uh, he wanted to refer to a certain paragraph that would be of help to them or of interest. And he put together a little spiral bound thing, just a few pages, well, quite a few, of references that people might want to find. All of this on his typewriter, 2 fingers at a time. And that eventually, the hosts here have shown. Now, this is interesting. I'm looking at it and it's backwards. Huh. It isn't backwards to you. It says Concordex.
Yeah, it looks correct for me. So
Well, anyway, that spiral bound thing, it turned out to be a wonderful, handy thing, a wonderfully handy thing for so many individuals that wanted to find a certain reference or a certain paper. And he did all of that on 3x5 cards by hand, is my understanding. And I don't know who has those cards now, but that was an impressive sight, the labor he went to serve other people and the Urantia revelation.
did he um did he do any creative writing?
He was always writing a column of some sort in his earlier days, but I don't think he ever wrote novels of that sort of thing or that type of entertaining
Mhm.
things. He was more or less in. That's a good question, and I'm not sure I can answer it properly.
Yeah. Did he did you think he introduced a lot of people to the Urantia book in his life?
Yes, yes, and they were people who were in business, many of them, related to advertising and or selling. And he had some really interesting people working with him. You mentioned Lee Rector. I don't know what their relationship was in detail. Um, but speaking of famous people, I associate Lee Rector with a gal in Nashville um, who was a performer. Can you think of her name?
Mary John Wilkin?
What? Yes.
Yeah,
Say it again.
Mary John
Her
Wilkin.
name? Mary John Wilkin. Yeah.
Yeah.
She was influential, and then with someone who wrote some songs with her, Chris Christopherson.
Yeah.
I don't know much about celebrities related to the Urantia book. You're the one who has the finger on that, which is extremely interesting.
Yeah, Lee originally, through asking questions about famous people in Nashville, that's how I kind of, Lee started telling me about his friendship with your father, because there were some occasions when your father came and spoke in their group, and their group had, around the time that it was starting, because of Mary John's connections, probably for the most, as a large part because she was so well connected in the music industry. There are a lot of, influential people, musicians and songwriters and so forth, that would attend the meetings to, sometimes maybe they just went to a few meetings. Some others maybe were serious readers. There's a lot of we don't always really know, but we do. It is fun to hear about. Talk to different people, and maybe Lee was out of town when somebody else who was at the meeting met some legendary Nashville personality and so forth. And Lee was there when another famous, very successful songwriter named Hal Bynum had a Urantia book sent to Willie Nelson, and it was going to be given to him at one of his 4th of July festivals, or what they called them, like a big event. And he was the one who took the pictures. And Lee was very connected in the music industry too, because he was the editor for Music City News, which was the only really serious publication that was focusing on country music at the time in the 70s.
Did these people publicize or not publicize? Did they mention even the Urantia revelation sometimes? I wouldn't know, since I'm not into music that much of current day.
Yeah. For the most part, they didn't. I think that in the case of Mary John, she was doing gospel music, and so she felt like she didn't want to sort of alienate some of her evangelical listeners and things like that.
Oh,
that
of course.
They would maybe brand it as evil or something like that. There was a case when Merle Haggard, who, it seems like it really just circulated among country musicians, not just because of Mary John Wilkin and them, but maybe because supposedly Willie Nelson gave a lot of books away, but he was quite close friends with Merle Haggard. But there was an occasion where he called the Art Bell show and said, made some comments about the Urantia book. I think he said that he was so impressed by how beautiful part 4 was, and said that it's hard to imagine that a human could have written it. And that's a pretty, seems like a pretty common thing that people say if they give it a serious, if they seriously kind of acquaint themselves with the Urantia book. How about you? Do you, are there certain aspects of what have kept you passionate about the Urantia book throughout your whole life?
Yeah, it's an inner passion, a quiet one, but it is a constant gratitude for having been born to somebody who was who he was, and got me and my brother and the gal that I married. She knew about the Urantia book because I told her, but it didn't really take. She would dust it regularly on the shelf. And then we got involved in a church in Chatsworth. That was sort of you'd call a community church type thing. And it was so, we were also rewarded by the preacher and his wife and their frankness and the way they preached the gospel in a wonderful way. In that church, in fact, there were people like me who were devout Urantia believers. There was a gal who spoke in tongues. There were others who had various, and we all came together joyfully. That was a wonderful experience, and I'll be grateful for that for a long, long time. And Patricia got interested. My wife at the time became interested in the Jesus story because of that church and those people. That finally she took the book down and started reading it seriously, and we did that together. And that's how she got into it. And both of our kids have differing opinions. My son is not interested, and our daughter is, Sally Annabella, she uses for her last name.
Well, that's nice to hear that like the interest in the book won't stop. There will be probably more generations, because it's interesting how it is quite
Yeah.
it's more common that children of readers don't become serious readers themselves, it seems like, but it seems like on the other hand, when they do, they tend to be quite serious about it. There's maybe a maturity
It
to it.
answers so many questions, Michael. It's just wonderful. Uh, as I said, starting at 13, kids like that at that age have a lot of confusions about life. And the Jesus papers, in my opinion, offer wonderful guidance. And as I say, I'm grateful for that all these years later, and for the nudges when I've had a choice to make between this opportunity overseas to teach or this one locally and more locally. And I think I've gotten the right nudges every time. And I have questions. Of course, there's another question that we probably can't get into now. I'd like your opinion of eventually. How is it that God permits so many people to suffer? I contrast myself, who's been extraordinarily lucky with health, not totally free of problems, but really remarkably free of agony and pain. And my friend who I grew up with in Park Ridge, Illinois, has had decades of pain and through no fault of his own, not from drinking, not from any abuse of himself, but simply the bad luck to be in a body that is causing him anguish for years. I'd like to, I wish that could be changed, but that's just a human wish. Um,
Yeah, it
and
seems like when we're fortunate to not be suffering, it's almost like disrespectful if we have an opinion about someone else's suffering, because we don't know what they're going through, or we can only imagine it. But
yeah,
I guess,
you can only imagine. Yeah,
and
and one wonders about fairness. But the book often refers to our short life, your short life on Urantia. It doesn't seem short when suffering like my friend. Uh, and another thing, how much is the divine, our helpers of various sorts, involved in apparently petty things? And I'd like to ask your opinion, seriously, about an episode that occurred. I had an apartment in a condominium building on the second floor of a three-story building, about 4-minute walk from one of the most beautiful beaches in this world, Kata Beach, Kata, in Phuket, Thailand. And I'd go down to the beach often, and it was not heavily populated at that time. Uh, and one day I was in the water in my swimsuit, and I had my car key. No, I didn't have a car over there. I had my apartment key and something else on in my pocket. And the weather was pleasant and warm. The water was warm, but it was a little heavier current than usual. And what happened was, when I reached in my pocket, as I was approaching the shore, ready to go home, my keys were not there. And I thought, oh, this is not good. If I don't find my keys, I'm going to have to walk a couple of miles to a restaurant where I have the owner, who I gave a key to hold for me, in my swimsuit. And I sort of waited for the keys to show up because I know that nature brings things to the shore always. And I thought, I'm going to ask God directly, or my helpers, spiritual helpers, to help me find those keys. And I did that sincerely, knowing that usually the divinity doesn't get involved in such things, but that divinity also, I think, has a sense of humor and would be amused by this mortal presuming upon all of them to help me with my little key finding chore, so I wouldn't have to go through other avenues that might not turn out fruitful. The guy may have lost the key or whatever. So here I was wondering, would the keys turn up? And I went to shore and waited and waited and waited and looked up and down near where I had been and waited, and nothing happened. And I thought, well, that's normal. Keys are heavier than twigs that wash up on shore. And so I was about to head home and then, not home, but head toward the road and walk a couple miles to that restaurant I mentioned. And lo and behold, there at my feet were the keys. I didn't know what to think. And even now, I would like to know I like to deal with percentages when estimating something like that. Right now, I think 52% it was just natural, but 48% maybe the prayer was answered and they humored me. What do you think?
My mom has that proclivity or gift or mysterious pattern where she is able to, she'll close her eyes and pray to find something that she's looking for, especially if she's really stressed, like, she's going to the airport and she can't find her passport or something like that.
We all lose things that we had shortly before.
But she often will, she'll pray and then she'll go straight to it. It'll be like, it is like she's somehow being shown. But yeah, it seems like it's a bit of a mystery to what extent, if to what extent it could be something from our own, some part of our soul or our subconscious, or if we're getting outside help. And maybe sometimes it's maybe we can never really know, but that it does seem like something's going on.
Well, I don't know. You're right, but in your thinking from your years of Urantia Book understanding and your general makeup, do you think it was divine help or just nature? Do you have an opinion?
I can't. Yeah, I really can't say. Yeah, huh? I can't. I don't feel like I can form an opinion on that question, really. But what do you think? Well, I think that in your sincerity about deciding that you wanted to pray about it was also maybe played a role, that you kind of, there was part of you that had an expectation that it would come back. Otherwise you would have given up a lot sooner. So in a way, that aspect also plays a role of that there was a part of you that had that maybe somehow higher intuition that you shouldn't give up on the keys, and that you should wait, which most people probably wouldn't have done. But maybe that also ties in your faith.
Was I waiting on nature to bring them in, which probably is what happened?
Yeah.
Or was I waiting for God's hand to deliver the keys?
Yeah, it seems unlikely that. It seems more, maybe more likely that you might have been benefited from some sort of, you know, guidance. It's easier to speculate in that direction, I think, than to speculate that like a midwayer would have actually moved your keys. You know what I mean? But I wouldn't presume to know or say one way or the other about that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, it can be encouraging to have those types of experiences when you feel like when you kind of notice, or like you talked about these nudges, or when you have like extreme serendipity um, associated with something that, you know, when you're trying to do something good and then serendipity kind of makes it even better and that kind of thing. It's definitely very encouraging. I had a experience, you telling this story just sticks one experience out in my mind, where I was at work landscaping at this beautiful property that was owned by some billionaires in Hawaii when I was 19 or 20. And we were eating lunch, and I looked at this tree and I said, that tree's going to fall someday and it's going to break that fence. And it was this giant eucalyptus with this giant log sticking out. And then like 40 minutes or an hour later, I was pulling weeds, and it wasn't a windy day. You know, I mean, eucalyptus trees are known to fall. They're quite dangerous, but still, it was a completely non-windy day. But it was just such a coincidence that the whole tree fell down, or this whole big side of the tree with its log that's probably a circumference that weighed like tons, and it broke the fence. It also actually broke the cement driveway, and these people were so rich that it cracked it so badly that they, you know, they had good insurance or whatever, but they cared enough that they actually had that part of the driveway like repaired. But you know, that was kind of part of my routine, was that I would sweep that driveway. So, you know, in a way, my life, maybe when I had that, you know, when I said that and I thought that thought, it was actually like, you know, I was kind of shocked that it happened right after I said that and I had the thought, at number one. And number two, it made me realize that I could have been, if I had been sweeping under there, it happened so fast, I could have been dead, you know, and it was part of my daily routine to sweep the driveway. So, but it's,
Oh,
yeah, it's encouraging when we have those types of experiences, you know, that we're, can be the recipients of some intuition or guidance or help.
yeah.
Stay out of
It's
harm's
fun to
way.
wonder about those
Yeah.
things, and we all have them. Almost everybody can think of some episode in their life where they might have had divine help, whether they asked for it or not, but especially if they've challenged God, help me find those keys. Uh, with a sense of humor, I understand. Hmm.
Um, did your father talk? I mean, I know in the old days there was a sense that stories about like apocryphal types of stories shouldn't be talked about a lot, right? Or that people like Christie would say, "Oh, that's you know, let's not talk too much about all these stories." But it seems like, you know, a lot of people still did, in their own ways, you know. But did your dad have many? Did he share many of those types of stories about like things that he heard or experienced in the old days that?
No, there wasn't much talk about other than the basic revelation itself. And I have never been really privy to people who have odd views, at odds with ours, with mine. And I really, when I did hear something strange, I didn't pay much attention. For example, I relished hearing Vern Grimsley speak in the early days when he was at the campus, Berkeley, I believe, in California. And he'd go out and interview college students and never mention the Urantia book, but mention the principles that it offers. Excuse me. Let me get just a little water here. And his sense of humor was wonderful. I might digress just a bit, where in his prime, he was a great, great speaker. In fact, he took pride in saying he was the closing speaker for all the big conferences and so forth of that particular time. And one time I was involved with FUSLA, as it was called then, First Urantia Society of Los Angeles. And Julia Fenderson was the shining light there. That's a wonderful, wonderful girl. The nearest thing to an angel that I have known. Julia Fenderson got Vern to come down and Mo Siegel on the same day and asked Mo to be introduced by, or asked Vern to introduce Mo Siegel. And just one simple little funny thing stays with me all these decades later. He said, now, many of you, he had a wonderful deep voice. Many of you don't realize that Mo is one of quadruplets. Unfortunately, Eenie, Meenie, and Miney couldn't be here today. I think that's wonderful. And he took that sense of humor and the Urantia principles to the campus for many years when he was a leading spokesman, the leading spokesman, I might say.
There,
Oh, and then I would go into the fact that when he apparently had some things in his mind that became influenced by unreality, I didn't pay much attention to that either. That's what we were talking about a moment ago. I usually stick to the tried and true and don't have much interest in peripheral things, even today in politics, for example.
yeah, I'd like to try to interview Vern Grimsley's wife. She Nancy, I believe, was her name. We've
A
talked
little
about
louder?
it. Maybe she's come across some great stories to share.
I didn't get that much,
Oh,
very much of that. I didn't hear it
the
clear.
the woman who Vern Grimsley was married to is someone who I've been wanting to interview someday to hear
Who was married to who?
Oh, Vern Grimsley.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and
Nancy
yeah,
is her name.
I imagine there's so many people who have so many stories when it comes to Urantia history, and I'm really I'm interested in it all. I've so far with what I've been working on in terms of writing and research, it's been mostly focused on famous musicians and so forth, but it's all really interesting. It's Speaking of, if you were living in Southern California, did you go to this? I think it was maybe the first real conference in Los Angeles area where Buffy St. Marie performed. Did you go to that one?
I need to hear that again.
Oh,
One of the first conferences.
oh,
Where
there was a conference in the early 70s in California that might have been the first one of the FUSLA group where Buffy St. Marie performed at the conference. I was just wondering
yes,
if
I remember Julia Fenderson again. I got her to come. That was a wonderful thing.
Yeah, so you were there.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I don't remember the conference, but I remember Buffy St. Marie.
Julia Fenderson also told me that, or someone who visited her told me that when he came to her house, some people were just leaving, and then she said, "Yeah, those are guys from the band Three Dog Night who are reading the Urantia book and came to visit me to talk about the Urantia book." And those are the stories I've heard about her. Really, I haven't heard a lot of stories, but yeah, some of these, like you said, that it's interesting that you said the women who were running the show in at 533 tended to be women, and she was also, yeah, like a really really special person. Inspired a lot of people.
Oh my, I enjoyed every minute spent with her. And during my time, I was president for 2 terms of FUSLA. And she was the one who really ran the show and did all the good things and brought all the interesting individuals.
Yeah.
Yeah, she did everything.
Well, maybe I'll stop the recording and we can chat for another minute before before we maybe need to go. But before I stop the recording, it's such a pleasure to hear you share stories and spend a little time with you. And thank you so much, Jeff.